Alright, so here we are on lesson 25, a fraction as a percent. So today we're going to work on converting fractions into decimals, into percents, and go back and forth in a lot of different ways. So if you look up here in bold, these are the important things to note. Alright, so for converting a fraction to a decimal, it says to change the denominator to a 10, 100, or 1,000. Right, because fractions are always out of 100, or percents are always out of 100, sorry. So if we look at this example here, we have 3/8. If we look in our calculator, let's try putting it into 100. So if we do 100 divided by 8, that doesn't really work. It kind of gives us a decimal, and we don't want a decimal in a fraction. So let's check 1,000. 1,000 divided by 8. That works. So we can multiply the bottom by 125 and the top by 125. So then our new fraction here, I'm going to kind of keep going into the next box, would be 375, oh boy, here we go again, over 1,000. Alright, so now we need to put that as a decimal. So that's 375 thousandths. So that would be 0.375, right? This is 375 thousandths. So as a percent, and if you look up here, converting a decimal to a percent, it says to multiply by 100. And if you remember the little trick, if you're multiplying by 100, that means you move the decimal 2 times to the right. Alright, so if we look at 0.375, let me try writing it again. Alright, if we write 375 hundredths as a percent, we're just going to move that decimal over twice, so we would get 37.5%. I'm going to write it on the outside here. And we can have 0.5 or half of a percent. Alright, so now if we look at the next one, they gave us a decimal. So to go from a decimal to a fraction, you just read the decimal. So this is 35 hundredths. So that means the fraction would be 35 out of 100. And it's easy to put this decimal into percent, right? We move it over 2 spots. So then our decimal would be 0.30, or sorry, our decimal is already 0.35. The screen is distracting me. So that means our percent would just be 35%. This is kind of like what we did yesterday. Alright, so now they gave us the percent. So they gave us 84.5%, and to put it as a decimal, so up here it says percent to a decimal, it says divide by 100. So that means we would move the decimal, instead of 2 places to the right, we would move it 2 times to the left. Okay, so if we move that decimal over, alright, we get for a decimal of 84.5%, we would get 0.845. Okay, so now as a fraction, again, you just read it out loud. That is 845 hundredths. So our fraction would be 845 over, or not hundredths, sorry, thousandths. 1, 2, 3 thousandths, and that's our fraction. And right now we don't need to simplify, so don't even worry about that. Okay, our next one here, they gave us a decimal, 0.325. So I say we do the fraction first. So if we read it out loud, that is 325 thousandths. So our fraction would be 325 over 1,000. Then our percent, we move that decimal over 2 places to the right. So our percent would be 32.5%. Okay. Then our last one here on this page, we have 2 over 25. So we want to write it as a fraction of tens, hundredths, or thousandths. We can't do tens because 25 is bigger than 10, but we know 25 goes into 100. And if you think of it as quarters, how many quarters are in $1? That would be 4. So we'd multiply the bottom by 4 in the top by 4. So our new fraction here would be 8 over 100. So now if we write that as a decimal, we read it out loud, that is 8 hundredths. So that'd be 0.08. And then for a percent, we move that decimal over 2 spots to the right, so we would just get 8%. Alright, so remember, all those bold things at the top, those are important things to remember as you're going back and forth. Okay, we are going to skip page 8 for now, so I want you to keep going on to page 9. We're going to look at example 2. It says, a survey was taken that asked participants whether or not they were happy with their job. An overall score was given. It says that 300 of the participants were unhappy, while 700 were happy with their job. Give a part-to-whole ratio for comparing happy participants to the whole, and then write a part-to-whole ratio of unhappy to the whole. So for happy, they said that 700 participants were happy. So we know the first part of the ratio is going to be 700 compared to, now we have to find the whole, so if we add 700 plus the other 300 responses, that gives us 1,000 responses. So it would be 700 to 1,000. So now if we write it as a percent, this would be, if we wrote it as a fraction first, this would be 700 over 1,000. So if we put it as a decimal, that would be 700 thousandths. Alright, so then if we just move that decimal over 2 places, it would just be 70%. And now if we do the ratio of unhappy people to the total, 300 participants were unhappy, so 300 again to 1,000 for the total. So let's write it as a fraction first. We would get 300 over 1,000. And then as a decimal, that would be 0.300, right? 300 thousandths. So then if we move it over 2 places to the right, we would get 30%. We also could have gotten that if we looked at the 70% and we would have done 100% minus 70%, we would have gotten 30%. Okay. We're going to skip this part. We're not going to create a model, and we're going to skip exercise 1 for now. So we're going to flip over to the next page, so page 10, and we're going to look at exercise 2. Exercise 2 says to use the tape diagram to answer the following questions. Number 1 says 80% is what fraction of the whole quantity? So if we look on here, we're looking at percents, we're looking at 80. What fraction of is that? And if we look up above, that is 4/5. Okay, number 2 asks 1/5 is what percent of the whole quantity? So if we look at 1/5 up here, they tell us that that is 20%. Okay, number 3 says 50% is what fraction of the whole quantity? So we know 50% out of 100, if we think about that, 50% up here on the bottom would be right smack dab in the middle. So if we're looking up here, we're looking in between 2/5 and 3/5. We don't really want to say 2.5/5. We don't want decimals and fractions. But what is 50% of 100 anyways? If you think about it, isn't 50% half of 100? So the fraction here would just be 1/2. And then last one, 1 is what percent of the whole quantity? If we look at 1 over here, 1 is 100%, right? 1 whole. Okay, so let's look at exercise 3 now. Almost there. Exercise 3 says Maria completed 3/4 of her workday. Create a model that represents what percent of the workday Maria has worked. So we're going to put the same sort of picture as up above. It's kind of like a tape diagram in a sense. So we're going to draw our box. Alright, and if they're talking in quarters, that means we're going to need 4 lines here. So 1, 2, 3, 4. I'll have to erase a little bit here. Alright. So now this would be 0 on the top here and then 0% on the bottom. And this would be 1 over 4, this would be 2 over 4, 3 over 4, and then 4 over 4. And we know 4 over 4 is 100%. So now we have to split up these other lines. So we are going to do 100 divided by 4, which gives us 25, right? Same thing. If we have $1 and we divide it up by 4, we get 4 quarters. So each line is 25%. So we have 25%, 50%, and then 75%. So it says to create the model. Now the next part asks, what percent of her workday does she have left? So she's done, I'll do it in red, she's done 3/4, so all of this. So how much does she have left? And as for a percent, that one box represents 25% is left. Okay, and then the last question says, how does your model prove that your answer is correct? We can say that we only have one box left. And then we can say that each box is worth 25%. So again, kind of similar to a tape diagram. Alright, let's do one more on the next page. The top, just exercise 4. It says Matthew completed 5/8 of his workday. What decimal would also describe the portion of his workday that he has finished? So we're looking at 5/8 here, and we're trying to get that into a decimal. So we're trying to put this into hundreds or thousands, and if you look back on the first page, we discovered that 8 can be put into 1,000 if we multiply by 125 on the top and the bottom. So in the calculator, if we do 125 times 5, we get 625. So this is 625 over 1,000. Then we're trying to write it as a decimal, so that's 625 thousandths, which would be 0.625. And then if we went one step further to write it as a percent, we move that decimal over 2 places. So this would be 62.5%. Okay, so go through this, see if you have any questions for tomorrow, and we'll do some more practice all together in class.